All right. Well, good morning, Greg, and hello to everyone listening. This is going to be hopefully a fun, interesting episode, and hopefully I get some questions answered. This time, it's like I would say I'm fired up, and Greg is doing the Brian,
I'm mellow.
calm
I'm
down.
wondering what's going
so,
on. Brian, I
so
just don't want it to be a Meg episode, you know?
yeah. So here's the thing. We're just for the listeners, we're recording this on July 18th. So recently, over the past weekend, some major events occurred.
Yep.
That has been the topic of the week, and of course, I'm talking about the death of Richard Simmons. And so we're going to jump into that. No, obviously, we're talking about the assassination attempt on Donald Trump, and the social commentary in a sense that comes from this. And now this happens with every major event where everyone gets on and they're the expert. All of a sudden they bring up all this stuff, and like it's always just draining to me. And I'm sure it is to most people, and most people complain about that and they make fun of those people, but yet we all do it themselves. So what I kind of wanted to approach with this, Greg, is I was going to kind of get your take on this, on why we as humans do this, because there's my idea is that, like, everyone wants to say, oh, it's the media, oh, it's social media, oh, it's this. It's like, no, the technology has changed, but people are the same. Like, people are the same as they've
I'll agree.
always been. So when I took a step back from all this, from listening to all this nonsense, because just for some of the listeners who don't know too, like, this is one of those contexts where, one, I was a sniper in the Marine Corps. I did a lot of protection work, high threat protection for different government officials and agencies all over the world, as a, well, then you call it designated defensive marksman or counter sniper team. And so, like, I have direct knowledge of tactics, techniques, procedures, how this stuff works, and you have experience in this field, in this situation, as do you, Greg, in other realms, not as a sniper, but doing even presidential details with different protective
Uh-huh.
stuff. So like, if there was something that came up that I could speak to, it would sort of be on the subject. But you know why I don't, is because I wasn't fucking there. So I can speak
Right.
to my experience and typical things that are supposed to happen, but I can't tell you anything about what happened on the ground. And when these things occur, it's like, I see people with the supposed vast experience commenting on stuff, but, like, if you have experience, that the initial reports of something that's happening are what? They're always fucking
They're
terrible
bullshit.
and mostly
Yep.
wrong. That there's a lot of stuff that comes out that ends up not being, oh, that was something someone said and it got to the news and then they spread that, right? There's a lot of really, really bad information. And it's actually done in a manner that, like, people are trying really hard to get out the information that's necessary, right? And you flood the net, and then no one knows what is what and what's real and what actually happened. There's other things I noticed too, like, eyewitness testimony were terrible. People, even when you're trying really, really hard to recall the events and be honest, like, you don't have a clear view of things. So
Yep.
when people come on and start commenting on this stuff, it's like, it's sort of infuriating me. It's like, you're just adding nonsense out there. Or even if they bring up a good point, like, their overall way of approach and theoretical base for this stuff is just either non-existent or they don't even know. And so it's sort of frustrating and interesting to me. And so I didn't want to, I'm not, this isn't going to be like sort of a bash on those people thing. I actually take it from a completely different perspective, because um I still go to other people for advice. Yes, I was a sniper, I had this role, but, like, I haven't been in that world in a long time. So when people will come to me with questions about that stuff, or like a rifle or a new scope or something like that, I'll be like, hey, hit up my buddy so and so, or here, take this guy's number and ask him all the questions, because he's on top of this stuff. Dude, I've been out of that world for so long. And so but either way, the point and the topic sort of today is why is us as humans, why do we do this? And like I said, this has to be something that's been around longer than Instagram and a 24-hour news network, right? That this is ingrained in human beings. So I wanted to go to you, not just because, like, your expertise on human behavior and explaining this, but also because you're not really on social media. You're on LinkedIn, and, like, functionally you don't understand it at all, how it all works. It's
I've been at
hilarious.
it for 13
But
years and I still learning. Yeah, I don't
but
understand
you
anything.
but you but you do understand the concept, because like
People. Yeah.
yeah, well, and even, when I explained, you asked me about Instagram a long time ago, and
Yep.
what I said was like, because if you're listening, what Greg used to do a lot when we had a lot of folks was, you put together like a PowerPoint, and maybe one photo, it may be five photos, and then an explanation of, hey, here's what I saw, here's some photos from the parking lot, this is why this is important. And you just call them instructor development, right, to keep people
Yep.
fresh, give a new perspective, or it could be a case that's happening, like, hey, take a
Yep.
look at these elements of the case because that's important and relevant to what you're teaching this week or something, right?
Right.
And so I explained, he was like, that's basically Instagram, just with a different motive. People are just sharing parts of their life with a bunch of different photos and an explanation of what that is. And it's like, oh, okay, so different intent, different motive behind it. Like, you're doing this as a teaching, they're just doing it as you're sharing your life experience and stuff. So
Yeah.
you actually do understand this stuff as a medium, just in a different perspective, which is why I want to get your opinion on some of this stuff. So
Yeah. Yeah.
we'll get
Yeah.
into a few areas, but the big one I want to know is what is it about humans that we feel the need to speak up and say something, because I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
there's a lot more behind that than people realize.
Yeah, and I think we're gonna have to take it in pieces and parts. I think we need to go
Yeah,
back
that
in
was a long
between some of
intro.
them. No, no, I love the intro because we get to meet Angry Brian. A lot of people don't know there's that side of you,
They
Hungry
don't.
Hippo, and then when they see it, and the greatest thing in the world is you're not angry because somebody didn't come to you to speak on CNN. You're not angry, and coming back and saying a minute of angle, no, the millimeter of, descent on
Yeah.
the Coriolis. That's all horseshit. What it is we like to talk about things that we can think can improve human behavior, or we talk about limits of human performance. Again, with the understanding that we want an output, and the output is that you become better at being able to see things. So, I always like to start with historical perspective. Okay, Jobs, it's okay. She saw a horse or a chipmunk, so she'll be fine in a minute
Oh,
here.
dog.
And
Dog is
yeah,
barking.
Java. So she doesn't bark. She just run by shouting.
Yeah.
The first section is, remember, our need to be a part of a tribe or a clan. So social media meets that need, and we're not going to talk all about social media, but let's talk a minute about it. Our brains are wired for connections with other humans, and bad things always happen when we interrupt that cycle. So, antisocial is not the same thing as wanting or needing to be alone. I know a lot of people that I would classify as loners, that live up in Gunnison, Colorado, because they like being loners and they're completely
Yeah.
successful and they're wonderful humans. Okay. So, I would also say, Brian, it's very different when you choose to be a loner or when society
Hmm.
chooses to leave you alone.
Chooses
And
you. Yeah.
so first, if we can understand that, now we seek out tribes, we seek out clans, we want to have authentic societal and psychological connections with other humans. Guess what? That's no different, historical again, than my first section. Is back in the 60s and 70s, our parents, your parents, and mine did what was called happy hour. Now, happy hour is taking on a whole new meaning now, folks.
Yeah.
Look it up. In the 60s and 70s, everybody that lived around Detroit worked for General Motors in one way, shape, or form. Before they ever made it home for dinner, they would stop at a club or a bar and they would sit around and have their fancy drinks and they would bullshit. They would talk
Hmm.
about politics and they would talk about religion and they would talk about their shitty boss, not for social validation as much as for a release, for a cathartic moment from a busy day. And that's where we get the smoking and alcohol are bad for us, but that's what we relied on, Brian. That was our
Yeah.
escape mechanism.
Yeah.
So our social media then was the Club Chevelle and Warren. And we would stop in and we'd have a couple of drinks, and the bar knew it. So they had bar food and they had, low drink prices. And then we would DUI ourselves back home, and generally beat up our significant other or kick the dog. I mean, there was a lot of bad repercussions from it.
Yeah. There's a lot
But
of bad
remember,
things going on too. Yeah.
in our
Yeah.
mind, what we thought was that we were reducing the stress in our environment, and we always got a positive feedback loop because of the dopamine. Were there
Hmm.
a couple of fist fights now and again? Were different things happening? Of course they were. But the idea was that
Yep.
we were in the moment. Hey, I'm with my tribe mates. Look at me. hey, go to Tim. He's always pissed about something. And Tim's like, hey, kiss my ass. You didn't go through what I went. And that's exactly what social media fills now. The problem is it's different. Flash to bang is much faster. Now we don't all get into our cars after work and drive to a place. It's not deliberate like that, Brian. Now it comes fast and furious. So people feel that need for validation. They feel the need to be heard, and they have an outlet
Okay.
now that they've never
So
had before, and it's so much quicker and more powerful, far reaching, let's say.
okay. So yeah, yeah. So I like your analogy there, the happy hour analogy. And so let's say that's what this is, and let's say
Yep,
there's a lot of discussion with that. So I the technology is obviously different. So one, the community is bigger. So the amount of people that'll hear it, the
yep,
spread, the reach, like you said, the flash to bang is faster. It's easier. So I don't have to sit there and think about what I want to say. I can literally go stream of consciousness on Twitter if I really want
precisely.
to.
Which again
And
is that
and
old
here's the
historical
other
way.
part, because you're taking it from a sociological perspective, which
Yep.
is what this probably whole episode really is. But if I get out of line at that bar, someone's going to punch me in the face.
Yes, because
Someone's
I'm
going to
looking
say, "Hey,
to them
shut
eye
the,"
to eye.
and
I'm in their
it's
presence.
right here in
Yes, sir.
person. So
Yes,
so
sir.
when I don't have the feedback mechanism is very different on social media,
Yes.
because there's little to no risk.
Yep.
There's little to no actual consequences for what I say or do on there. And then
Yes.
now what's happened, I believe, over time is that's now led to sort of that culture of, well, it doesn't matter. And here's where we forget that sometimes. And this is
Okay.
what we all do, because the fidelity and the granularity and the sort of production value of a video on Instagram is very different than that gritty, we're having a drink and a smoke and talking to someone at the bar and exchanging ideas, right? It's very, very different. And so we almost attribute different values to these, right? We can attribute someone as an expert in something that they're not.
Mhm.
We can look at it simply because we'll look at the production value and look at what they're saying and doing. Where, like, in the bar, you go, "Shut the f up, dude! You're just using big words again. That's Mike. He always goes to the
Yep.
thesaurus and tries to sound smart." You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like, you don't have as much of that. And then I think that sort of adds to this, like, that's a good point, where if you took that in a different context, you'd be like, the fuck are you talking about, dude?
Right.
And
Right.
I that's one of the issues I have with it. And the other big thing is too, is because you don't have that correction in the bar, right? So if I'm in that community and people know me and I start piping up about something, one person might go like, "Yeah, yeah, but what, you don't know shit about that area." But then maybe the rest of the group goes, "Oh no, uh, Brian's actually been studying that his whole life. I know he works down there at the plant,
Yep.
but he goes and he's a history buff and collects this or something like
Yep.
that, right? That
As
allows
a
for
matter of fact, he's the
because
most qualified person to talk about that. Exactly.
well,
Yeah.
and there's different ways to look at it. Like, I just gave you my bona fides at the beginning to how I
Yep.
could talk on this specific example, but I don't, because I stay in my lane of what I do, and I don't mean that as a negative to people who do speak of it, because the other thing I see with I think is different on a social media platform than it is in real life is, you sort of, well, it happens in real life, it just happens at a greater scale on social media, is like this sort of character arc of these people. And
Yes.
I'll the group I'll belong to is the one I'll bash, right? So you've got these like veteran influencers, right? And maybe they start a company, or maybe they get out and they do something, and it's really cool, whatever it is. It's a coffee company, it's a t-shirt, it's a this thing, I've got
Mhm.
whatever going, awesome. And
Bourbon.
they get like,
Right.
dude, yeah, whatever it is, and they get like popular, and then they get a following, and it's like, hey, that's awesome. And then there's this character arc that they all fall into, and it's like, now, what's your opinion on this, what's your opinion on that? And that gets farther and farther and farther away from what their original message
Yeah.
was. And then now I'm listening to you because you're an influencer and I like what you say. Like, it's like, okay, you're a non-decision making member of a tactical level unit, and you're going to give your thoughts on Ukraine. Like, do you understand, like, that was my original what I wanted to do in life. Like I got a bachelor's in political science, and I was looking at all
Yep.
the stuff out in DC to go do, and because I really really enjoyed foreign policy and thought it was intriguing, my life went a different path, and I got more interested in what I do now. But the idea was like, this is extremely complex topic. Like, why are we oversimplifying that? And so we have this need to hear it from someone, and I get this because we talk about this in different ways. It's the um, just how society sociologically we're established with relationships and groups and tribes, and then there's always going to be a leader, and there's going to be thought leaders and influencers. That term goes back, for as long
Long
as
way.
humans have been around. But is it just more prevalent now,
Yeah.
or is it just now that we have the ability to see more than it was? And what is it again? Like, I know you're talking about, we need to be heard, we need to be said, but
Yeah.
like,
T- But
why
but
do
let
we why, but then why do I do that in one area and not in the other? Meaning
so let's
I'll
go
make
back.
fun of you, Greg, say like,
Yeah.
you're not an expert on COVID, but then when you're giving your theory on this, I go, oh yeah, that's awesome, I agree with this. Like, you
Yeah.
see how
Yeah.
we're so
Yeah.
it's like a dichotomous way of looking at this thing.
So like a sea lion, we're going in and out of the waves
Yeah,
here
I'm all over
because
the
we
place
have
right
to.
now, so I'm
No,
trying,
it's
trying to
okay
stay
because
focused.
again, welcome to Angry Brian, folks. This
Yeah,
is
I
where
get,
Left of Greg first started when we were
well,
driving in the car and he was banging on the
and
dashboard and
and I
ranting.
can't,
I
yeah,
love it.
I can't get my thoughts out in a coherent manner, which is why I'll never be one of
Exactly.
those sort of like, personality types that have that, because I can't do that because it's so
You know
fucking
what
upset.
grinds my gears?
Yeah.
No, so here's the thing. So we think we need to unwind or relax or escape. But in
Okay.
actuality, we need to socialize because socialization is a essential form of self-expression. We need to seek validation of others, whether it's a wife or a kid or a friend or a husband or a significant other, fill in whatever DEI you want. We also need to be entertained and find like minds for emotional support. That's an essential. That's not a thing that we can bargain with or trade off. And social media immediately offers us a safe environment with absolutely zero repercussions, exactly like Brian said. And I would posit that the average user on social media wants to remain connected and share their opinions and give emotional support to other humans, just like on Facebook. But what happened is now they got into a feedback loop of social validation that dumps dopamine. And you have also linked back in, not to use their title, but because that scary feeling in the pit of your stomach after being called out or fearing that you're going to be challenged on social media wants me to get back there and see how many more people linked, how many
Yeah.
more people looked at me. Are people reading it? Can I feel vindicated by what I say or do? So it's all a chemical game. But I would ask you to think just for a minute, what kind of total release do you think that Thomas Crooks felt when he finally hit send on that message he had been working on for weeks
Yeah.
and dumps his message on social media and heads for the rally? Okay, that's what we're fighting here, Brian. So you have homophily on one side, the tendency for people to seek out or be attracted to those birds of a feather who are similar to themselves, right? Then you got isopraximism on on the other side of the coin, and that's brought on by our mirror neurons. We're unconsciously mirroring the behavior of others that we admire or we want to be around, and it just starts to get going. It's not your plan for the long game. It just starts to happen. And then all of a sudden, we're like, hey, wait a minute. Let's not fight about this. We're tribe mates. And that cohesive nature of cooperation keeps drawing us back. I wonder what Jim said about my last post. So, have you ever been in a situation where you saw the same post over and over and over on different channels, and it's a
Yes.
guy saving a dog in Indonesia or whatever, and you saw it 6 months ago and you saw it a year ago, but now they changed the
Yeah.
music and they put a flower at the bottom and
Yeah.
then they put their own name on it?
Yeah.
That's seeking psychological and sociological validation, Brian. And we know that biologically, the return on investment is that we get a ton of dopamine from those things. So, and when that counter goes up, I don't even know if they use counters anymore, but remember in the early days, there was a counter,
Yeah,
how many
the
people hit your
likes
site?
and yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
likes. Yeah, that's a perfect way of describing it. So now
yeah,
what happens, Brian, is that instead of just unwinding and escaping like at happy hour, now we find out that, wait a minute, we got a whole bunch of new friends. and we're engaged in a whole bunch of new online activities. And my self-esteem even gives me a title. Somebody called me and said, "Well, would you
Yeah.
give an opinion on this?" Holy shit. And now guess what? We got one foot in the trap already, don't we? So every time we do it, it reinforces the fact that this is part of my identity and it's part of who I am. And you said earlier when you were joking, like, oh yeah, Chuck, he always reads into that shit. That a long time ago, it was slow enough. Like Shakespeare wrote about Falstaff and Henry the Fourth wrote about, hey, let's go have a drink before we go home for dinner and discuss these heavy topics, right? And I'm paraphrasing. Brian, we
Yeah.
don't do that now. We don't go to dinner
This
and
is
sit
this is
around with the
how we
family.
do it. Okay, so this
This
is
is
the
how we do it
mechanism
now.
which is not it's not it's not like congruent with how humans are. So what I'm getting from you
Yes.
is there's certain psychological and sociological underpinnings that
Yes.
and necessities that are sort of contributing to why we do this,
Yep.
and then the environment and the system and the medium takes over and creates that sort of feedback loop where now I'm doing it so much I don't even realize it. Now
So
it's
couple
so
that
your
with the
baseline is shifted.
immediacy. Yes, couple that with the immediacy of social media, the immediacy of information. One of the
Yeah.
first
Immediate
things
feedback.
when
Humans
yeah,
need feedback, and when you get immediate feedback, it's yeah, I
we'll
got you.
take it even if it's sketchy. So
Yeah.
so they had a microphone in a kid's face that knew crooks.
Yeah.
And this is what he said. They said, can you comment on the shitter?" And he said, "Yeah, I don't know him. I didn't know him in school. He wasn't in my class, but he was bullied and he was a loner." What?
Yeah. What
That's a
no,
SVF
that was a
up, right?
that was the I saw that because he's like, "Well, he got bullied a lot and people said stuff to him," and they were
Yep,
like, "Well, like what kind of things would people say to him? What do they call him?" "Well, I don't really know. I'm not sure, but I
yep,
know." It's like, "Well, wait a minute. You just said you're providing some form of evidence to support
yep.
your claim, and then when asked on the evidence, you cannot provide it."
This so
So,
now there was a repercussion though, because the interviewer had the mic in his face and was looking square at him. Just like that guy the other day on the news that I told you that said, well, he crawled up like an inchworm like Lee Harvey Oswald. Wait a minute, that didn't occur. You can't conflate facts and truth and historical perspective and come out with an opinion in real life because somebody will call you on it. But on social media, Brian, there's that freedom to say what you want. You can give a thumbs down to somebody and change the trajectory of their week, but you'll feel better for the next 4 hours. You get how that works, and I know you do, but I'm hoping that I'm
so
saying that in a manner that the people listening can understand.
okay, and then I would apply this then obviously if not just for someone who goes out there and says something and I'm going to speak my mind, but then it's then the same for like the comment section,
Yes?
right? And there's different types of stuff you'll see in there. That's why like even on our social media, like on like let's say certain ones you can control, like on our Instagram, like you can only comment on our stuff if you're following us. And I
Wow,
do
that's
that
cool.
for a specific reason because your stuff can get out there and people can share it and a lot of people can see it, but then it might pop up in your feed for some other reason because Instagram goes, "Oh, hey, you have these accounts you follow, check out this account. All these people follow this account too," right? So I'm just kind of explaining to you, Greg, but like so
Yeah,
it might
yeah, no,
pop up and
I'm
like
learning.
so accounts pop up that you're not even following, right? Just like on LinkedIn when it says, "Hey, do you want to follow?" or a lot of your followers are following this person, right? And so what I do is you have to actually click follow in order to comment on our post. And I do that as a barrier. I do that to keep out the lowest like common denominator, the lowest
Right.
1% of people that just assholes
Looking
that
for a
just want
fight,
to
right?
just say stupid stuff
Okay.
because it shows that you took the time, like you wanted to comment so bad on our post that you took the time to follow us. So you have to you had to take a step in there, so it demonstrates your intent, right? Because most people are going to go, well, oh, I want to say something. They go, oh, only followers, and they're like, or whatever, and they'll just go on, right? Because it's so that's who I'm trying to the riffraff I try to keep out, and it's one small barrier. But I would everything you brought up would apply to that comment section. So why what I mean, and you've seen them even on LinkedIn. The comment
Yep,
section are hilarious if you know a lot about human behavior, because it's just like, oh my god, it's again, it's slapping my forehead, going like, what are you talking about? So,
yep.
did these sort of same rules apply in there? And then why is that different? Because you're always going to get someone. Here's what I see: one, you're always going to have your classic sniper that's like, well, actually, this, or
Yeah,
whatever.
yep.
Then
Looking
you're going to
for
have
that
some.
fracture, that mistake that they can exploit, right?
Then you're
Okay.
going to have someone that says like, oh yeah, that's just like something I did, where they like they
Yep.
they make the post about them. And then there's like people who are just like you like I know Clark always calls you, like, he's like, I love Greg, he's my biggest hype man. Oh, McKaylee was saying things too, is like, my biggest hype man on LinkedIn, because you're just like, hey, that's awesome, like, way to go, or like, I support this, or like, that's really cool, great
Right.
job. So like, you though, and you're always like that with people, but those are
My
sort of
whole
the three
life.
different things. So what is that there? And then in the comment section, is that again, does that go back to the bar? Does that go
So I'm
back
the
to the
hype
happy
man.
hour?
I got to remember
Yeah.
that term and look it up later to feel if I'm going to be insulted. So look,
No, you won't.
in all of our social context, two different things, context and context, we look for lack of ambiguity, lack of anxiety, and safety through belonging, first part, and loyalty, second part. Brian, I know I can trust you. I know that you would stand up for me if I wasn't there. I know that if we get into a scrum, you're going to be the first one throwing punches, and that helps. That helps me go day to day. So what happens is now I'm online, and there's a great degree of anonymity. There's almost zero eye contact. I can't read your nonverbal communications, so I have to crush you big. And because I have
Yeah.
control over the keyboard, I have control over the narrative, the conversation, and I can tell you how to think. I can tell you how to feel. Okay. And that's all a mirror, again, back to isopraxism and
Yeah.
homophily. That's my feelings of inadequacy, my lack of control in my
Yes.
own life and other aspects of my life. Okay. That's why I have a need, a psychological and sociological need to post hateful comments. Okay. You see a person like me, Brian, you know me. I'm always glasses full. There's a way out of this. It's going to be great. I
Yeah.
love the
Yeah.
way you turn that around. Okay. But there's other people that I run into that are that it'll never work. We're all going to
Yeah.
die.
Yeah.
And
Eeyore.
that
Yeah.
just drains me, Brian. And
Yeah.
so I have to avoid those people because what happens is they take my chlorophyll, they take my oxygen, and they just use too much of me. So that's why there are two reasons I'm not on social media. It's like jazz. I'm afraid of it. I don't understand where it might be going, and all of the rules. And the second thing is that you know me. If somebody was being belligerent or mistreating or doing something like that, I couldn't take that. I would have to either fix that person or I would constantly be
Yeah.
sparring with them. And knowing that now with AI, that many of the comments aren't even generated by the person, you're being rude because that fills a hole in you. You're not being rude because you're smarter than me. And once we get that, that changes the battle space. So I
So
choose not to be there.
how much of this is let me sort of preface this, like, because you see this sort of different commentary, and
Mhm,
someone may bring up a good point
mhm.
based on their experience, right? I could bring up all kinds of different points on this one based on my experience. Like, I had people reach out and said like, hey, what is going, like,
On
the
Richard
best
Simmons, you mean?
questions I got.
Yeah, right.
Well, yeah, the best questions, like, well, they know. I, that was my response, like, when people were, "Hey, did you hear what happened?" Blah blah blah. I was like, "I know, man. What a great guy. I'm gonna be sweating to the oldies tonight in honor of Richard Simmons." And they're like, "What?" But
That's great.
but
Turn it. Yep,
the best questions I got, because people felt that they could reach out to me, which I hope they did, and
yep,
always, especially friends, people I know. Some were colleagues, some were friends, people we work with. But the best questions I got were for people who had no military, no security, no law enforcement background, because it was like, how does this happen, or what was this, or just pivot. And my thing was like, or like, they just wanted my take, and I said, this is right after this stuff happened. I go, look, man,
yep,
like, I don't know anything. I go, just from what I'm seeing in what's been reported so far, this sounds like a communications issue. This sounds
yes,
like someone was trying to do something, it didn't make it through. There's signal to noise, all the stuff we talk about. There's seams and
yep.
gaps, and they're
Sometimes
like,
too many people. with
Well, and the
their
other
hand.
thing is like, well, how come there wasn't this? And I was like, well, look, in a security element like this, you always have your overt, counter sniper teams out there.
Yep,
That's a deterrent more than anything. And then you're always going to have like a clandestine or covert team somewhere that's hidden, just like you have plainclothes people in the crowd, and you have uniform folks, and you have right. There's this web of how this works. Like, well, you just got on this perfect site. I go, yeah, they probably set up inside the building because they were like, hey, this is a perfect observation point,
exactly.
right?
It's
I've
right
done
where
that before.
anything's going to
I
happen. Yeah,
well, I'll tell you right now, when me and my buddy had our teams and we were on patrol, and like literally comes to me on the radio, it's like, hey, this is a perfect spot for an ambush. I'm going to set up here. And then guess what? There's a guy
yep,
fucking waiting there for us who
yep,
blew himself up on our patrol. So it was like, obviously, multiple people saw this as a great
the
ambush
exact
point.
same
You know
thing.
what I'm
Right,
saying?
right,
There's only so many. But I get what I'm getting at is, we always want an explanation. And humans
yes,
always want a simple explanation. We don't like uncertainty. We look for causal relationships in everything, right? We
right,
look for patterns where they often don't exist because we're primed as humans for pattern recognition.
exactly.
And
That's why we
so,
see
how
faces in
much of
clouds
this,
and a chip.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, exactly. Um, how much of this is based in fear?
yeah,
And I don't just take this situation in commentary. Now I talk big picture about all of it. Like every time there's a police video shooting or something that comes out, and you get saying we're going to do a video breakdown on this. We're going to break down the body worn camera and all this stuff. And I kind of think that it's like a lot of it doesn't have a lot of training value. And I'm like, well, what? And I try to really listen to what they're saying and what they're talking about. And so there's always like a tactical conversation. Well, you should have taken cover here, and you're this. And it's like, okay, that's great. Thanks. Like, whatever. You weren't there, but that I'm sure that's what you would have done. And I get
right,
that for like some points, but like, how much of that is done out of fear? How much
right.
of that is where I have to justify, or I have to say, this is why this occurred. I
No, it's a
wouldn't have
great
made that
question.
mistake, so I know this won't happen to me. How much of that
Yep,
is just based purely out of fear?
yep. So I'll answer it two ways if you'll indulge me. First is hearing people immediately come out and give the loner explanation with the anti-social personality disorder. First of all, stop. You have no idea what you're talking about. Many people that I know are loners and they're perfectly healthy
It
and they don't need as much social
and
interaction as you
yeah,
do
yeah,
and they function
and
perfectly in society.
real quick before you get on that, because
Yeah, yeah,
all of
please.
and part of it is because a lot of these terms get thrown around so much that they become meaningless, and then everyone like I know so many people like, "Oh yeah, my ADHD brain." I was like, "Did you go to a
Yeah, yeah,
doctor?
yeah, yeah.
Did you get
Stop.
evaluated?"
Exactly. Exactly.
Or "Oh, that person's a narcissist." It's like, "Okay, how do you know that, and who
Yep.
cares, and what does that affect it?" Like
Yeah, your
like
desktop calendar is
we
out
heard
of
this
date. Throw it
term,
away.
or we
Yeah.
heard something like
W-
like
So let me
so
break that
part of
down.
that is because those terms become so
Yeah,
widespread. Yeah.
yeah, no, absolutely. And then now you have a taxonomy becomes inevitable, but it's not true. It's based on falsehood. So uh, uh,
Okay.
let me give you an antisocial personality disorder example. Have you ever watched an episode of Cops and seen a guy, no matter how many times they tell him to calm down or you're going to go to jail, and he's not only fighting with the cops, but he's fighting with people at the scene and his family? And he's so belligerent
Yeah.
and drunk that he's covered in sweat. He's got dirt on his face and he's ripping off his own clothes while he's going up. And the gibberish that he's spouting is just hilarious. It's stupid. Okay. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about antisocial personality disorder. We're talking about the mental inability. It's a disorder to distinguish good from bad, and you're breaking laws and you're not conforming to social laws. This kid held it together. All the
Yeah.
people
S-
that we talk about with crooks fell right into all the thing, and we have an episode on this coming, folks, so I'm not going to ruin it now. But he fell right into, and I hate to call it profile because that spins everybody out of control. That's exactly what it is. He fits the
Yeah.
perfect profile for it, and he was screaming for attention. So the idea is that don't look at antisocial personality disorder as a reason for it. Why do you choose that? Because you're afraid, because you're an insecure, afraid human being, and you've got to point to something that's outside of your ken and say it must have been this. Why do we get afraid when we see a fraction of a millisecond of a video and somebody says, "Do you see this shadowy shape that looks like whatever?" Well, that's a UFO. And even the most trained naval pilot said it was traveling at 4,000 feet per second and doing this and that. Brian, there's
Yeah.
not enough on that video to draw a reasonable conclusion about anything. But because I'm controversial, it makes me feel better. I have some control over what's going on. And to know that you're questioning it too, now I've created a mini tribe, a mini form of socialization on social media that fits the need, but it's bullshit. Does that make sense?
And yeah, because the fear comes from not eh, we fear things we don't understand naturally as humans. That's
Absolutely.
why we're still alive. That's why we're all alive. Either we're us talking or you listening to this conversation right now. Because somewhere in your throughout your lineage, people said, let's not go do that. Let's not do that. Maybe we shouldn't go over there. I'm a little scared. And so they stayed alive.
You're exactly
And
right.
and there's so you have to have a healthy amount of fear for survival purposes. But I think a lot of this stems from I want to know, I want to understand this, and I don't because it's too vast, it's too broad, it's too complex. So I'm going to oversimplify it. And here's some things I know about the situation that are cognitively close enough or close enough to
Yep.
something that I know or have seen before.
Yep.
So it must be that. And that's first of all, that's a completely normal, logical, survival based way to think, and it's how we're wired to think, right?
Yeah.
It is that's what like meaning our own cognitive processes are working against us when it comes to sense making,
Yep.
because if I don't have a framework for this, because I've had some discussions even with my friends, and they bring up really great points. And
Yep.
one of them I saw was an interesting one in one of my buddies who's super knowledgeable in this type of stuff. And he was like, yeah, but look at what he did compared to what we know from tactical training at this program, the average person showing up and starting that qualification with an M4 at 100 yards and blah, blah. And I was like, yeah, but, and then it was like a light bulb moment for me. I was like, oh, okay, I see what you're comparing this to.
Yep.
That's an unreasonable comparison. And here's
Unreasonable
why.
comparison and an internal baseline. It's not an
Yes,
external
yes,
baseline,
and
right?
that
Come on.
that was my point. It was you're going off of what you know, and
Yes.
you can't
Yes.
unlearn what you know. You can't say, "Greg, put aside all of this experience you have over here and
No,
look at
it
it
takes
from this perspective."
agency.
Well,
Exactly.
you can't
Exactly.
do that. Like you can't
Nope.
unlearn. You can't just say, "I'm going to shut off the part of my brain that knows
Right.
this information and go
Better than
to it
it.
clean
Exactly.
slate." You can't.
Exactly.
So what we do is we equate it with what we know,
Yep. Yep.
but that can also get in the way because we don't know him. We don't know. And so we talk about the internal baseline versus the external baseline, and
Yep.
just what everyone does is is they go the exact opposite direction of what you're supposed to do in investigation. What everyone goes, I think this is what happened. Let me go find evidence to support my claim. It's like,
Oh
okay,
my gosh. You're
well,
right.
like that's the opposite way of what you're supposed to go. You have to go, what do we know? What can we prove that we know happened? And then build from there. And then let the evidence take you to where this situation goes. And you have to look at it as objective as you possibly can as a human. But we don't do that as people because I need to have an answer right now
Yes.
because my brain fucking needs that, and it needs it right
And I want
away,
to
and
beat
it
out
doesn't
the
want to burn
millions
any
of
more
people online
calories.
too. Yes. Yes.
Well, that's
Yeah.
the
There's the
other
two
part of
needs.
it
I agree.
that adds to the pressure of it, and the everyone wants to be the first one out with the story,
I think
and
so.
then now because you have no repercussions, people don't even retract what they said or change it later. They just go, well, you know, I mean, how much that that's the world we live in now. I mean, it's the government's fault that I even thought that it was a big conspiracy. It's like, no,
Exactly.
it's
So
not.
the word you're
It's
looking for
it's
is "I'm sorry," but
the
you don't
the
seem to
word you're
be able to
looking
find
for,
them.
like what you're saying is I'm not responsible
Yeah.
for checking the
Yeah.
veracity or of
Come
the
on.
information that I take in,
So
and so that's the diffusion of responsibility that we see. But it's like that's what frustrates me, but I
yeah, I
don't
get it.
want it to be I don't take it from a this person's an idiot or they're an asshole or they're just full of themselves. It's like, no, this is kind of how we're wired. This is the way things work, and it doesn't translate well over the mediums that we use today.
Yep.
So back in the happy hour bar, there was corrective measures, and whether those
Yep.
corrective measures were right or not, they were corrective measures for my tribe, my community where I was at. So
And they
it kept
formed your
me in line.
socialization for future. Yeah, exactly. So look, you said so much good stuff. Let's not hurry past this. Let's slow down for a minute. First of all, folks, when Brian comes out with something and he picks it to death, he comes to his own realization after a while and calms down and then starts going, okay, well, let's look at the scientific. But he started high and right, which is where we'll start again. I love that. And I mean, that's a really good trait, Brian, because you mentally etch a sketch, you throw out all the shit, you get a little pissed about something, and then you go back to find out why. Most humans don't do that, so I give you kudos for that. Let's go
Thank
to
you.
Crooks just for a second. Okay. Crooks,
Okay.
on the day that Trump is going to be in his town, and people are going to go, it wasn't his town, it was close town. Shut the fuck up for a minute and listen to what I'm saying.
His area.
Crooks, and now you got me angry. Crooks knows this. His family knows this. The neighbors know this. The people that are there know this. And Crooks comes up with the plan, by the way, because he is a social being. He says, Mom, Dad, I'm taking the rifle and going down to the rifle range, which is
Yeah.
like me telling you when I'm in San Diego, hey, Brian, I know there's a hurricane, but I'm going to run down to the pier and do some fishing. Okay. It's that egregiously obvious, but what happens is the flash to bang of social information and our likelihood not to believe that we're embroiled in this takes precedence. And so now the second part of that, now we use that information to go back and go, well, clearly there was a conspiracy because the parents didn't see it. You think this was this kid's first lie? You think he didn't lie to a whole bunch of people to
Well,
make this plan? Now, hold on, hold
yeah.
on. So what happens is now what we do is we mistake misinformation for accident,
Yes.
and we
Yes.
start making them
Or
way more than something. So there was a guy that's going down, and he goes, "Look at this woman in the background," and at this moment she looks to the right, and then there's a smirk on her face, and then she says something to herself. And when I slow it down, Brian, have you ever played Angry Birds when you're supposed to be paying attention? Have you ever been dicking around on your phone, sending somebody a text or a joke right in the middle of a really big concert or something like that? And if somebody took that moment in time and said, I'm going to judge the rest of this event by this completely out of line information, that's what I fear. Because that you said a number of things and they were all right. But what you failed to say is that there's a problem with these people getting on as experts because it dumbs down all of us. And that's the thing. It becomes what is. It becomes a fact in record because they put it in print. And that's not true. So we have to make sure that we go back to the bar, which I don't mind at all. But we
yeah.
have to make sure we go back to the 60s and 70s and we have to draw a line and say, no, this shan't stand. This is not how good tribe members act. This is not philosophically correct. This is not psychologically
Well,
correct. And it's not
there's
healthy.
there's um there's no going back. I know that. But it's a way to look at these situations, and it's funny because of course the first text I got from my brother about it, he's like, well, looks like we're taking a break from social media for a couple weeks, and it's like,
Right.
yeah,
Right.
because it's like, oh god, here we go. But we
Yep.
all we all and here's my other sort of question about this is,
Yeah. Yeah.
we now all know that this happens, right? That people get on and they say things and they're just trying to be the first, or they're trying to get heard. Like, we know this. We know, like, that's a recognition right there. And even people go, "Oh, here we go. Now everyone took their, I saw, all the memes out of this situation have been absolutely incredible, which gives me hope for
Some
human,
have
like,
been
people
very,
are
very
so
funny. Yeah.
damn funny. People are
Yep.
fucking hilarious, and
Yep.
which I love because those are great. And it's like, they were talking about some famous person, like, oh, so and so realized that they're a security expert now. They went ahead and put that hat on this morning. It's like, so we all
Yep.
know that happens, but then why does it continue to engage us, and why does it continue to happen? Like, you
Yeah.
get what I'm saying? How come I can say that about certain areas, but then I'll go on and talk about this and not
Yes.
realize it, in even though, is it just because I'm close enough to know, like, well, I kind of played that role before, so I can comment on it.
Yep.
Even though I know
Yeah, but even
nothing, like
yeah, you're right.
the people
Yeah,
investigating it don't even have all the information, and
right.
they're literally investigating it right now, and they're still putting everything together. So
Yep.
it's what is it about humans that we'll drop those lenses? We won't realize, we won't put those filters on when it's something that affects us.
Yeah, because there's a competition to be the one that drops your seed into somebody for procreation. I mean, if you want to know the really simplest answer about this, it's that there are tribal mechanics at work and you don't even know them anymore because you've been, asking for a number three and supersizing a clown's mouth for so long that you forgot that. But all of us have a role. Crooks had a role. And what was going on is in his life, he was searching for something he couldn't find one way, so he found an alternative. And did he succeed? Well, in a lot of ways he did. And I don't mean anything about his attempted assassination. I mean about his socialization. So when you're in your family and you're constantly being berated, and you don't make enough money and you don't do this and and somebody goes, well, that's why somebody blow tops. That's why somebody commits suicide. Yeah, but that's the end of the spectrum. Everything's this big long spectrum. I went and got gas today, and somebody goes, "Hey, nice car." Holy shit! That made the rest of my day, Brian. I went and ordered a sandwich, and not only did I get a sandwich, but those barbecue or sea salt chips were amazing. Or I did my whatever, and I got some sort of feedback. We don't understand how much that in a day-to-day environment is crucial to us. And so what happens is we get it from social media and we seek out sites that give us a return on our investment, whether it's pornographic or whether it's people sniping other people and commenting and being rude and being mean, or the breakdown. Now, I can watch a video breakdown and then type in, wow, I saw that, or man, that's good. And now I feel the same level
Yeah,
as if I'm with those guys in that group. And that one guy was a SEAL, Brian. Holy shit. And that one guy said he was a sniper, and I agreed with him. So that kind of feedback we're now getting in a different manner. The problem with it is flash to bang, the speed within which we're getting it, because it doesn't allow us to give ourselves the gift of time and distance and slow things down and think about it. Because if I would have said it at the kitchen table, my dad would have punched me right in the mouth. He would have knocked me out of that chair. If I would have been different politically or religiously or said something off color
yeah.
or done that, I would have known immediately that I was on the wrong path because we were in small groups. Then we went to work in our cubicles. Then we drove in our car in society with a bunch of other people in their cars. It's just faster now. So we have to take that into account. So not only is the information faster, but the release of the endorphins are faster. So now my electrochemical neurotransmitters, I don't have to wait around to get out my kit and find a vein and do the heroin. Now all I got to do is go online and throw a table, through the window and go, "Hey, bitches, I'm here," and I get that feedback. And Brian, I can do that on my phone while I'm
Yeah,
driving, right? And
yeah.
that's problematic because our emotional selves hasn't caught up with our intellectual selves yet.
So it's not. So what you're saying then is it's almost even though we know, like, okay, yeah, I start posting on social media, I get a bunch of likes and comments. Okay, that obviously get that little bit of dopamine, I get a reward. Okay, that's cool. I'm gonna repeat that behavior, and then it sort of
Yep.
becomes habit, right? And I think a lot of this stuff is people just end up, your baseline has shifted so much from what you think normal is. You're just on there all the time, you're
New
doing
normal.
this, and it becomes habit. And so
Yep.
now you're seeking that out, and but you're almost, what it sounds like you're saying to me is that it's even sort of deeper than that. Like the mechanism that we use now is tapping into a psychological and sociological imperative for all humans, and it's filling a void that needs to be filled. Like it's not
Yes.
just some pleasure, or, oh, everyone wants to say, oh, that person's just full of themselves, they got a big ego. Well, everyone has an ego. I don't use that term negatively. I use it just all humans are, you're concerned about yourself and your feelings more than you recognize, I think, is
Yes.
what you're getting at. Is so
Yes.
this inner one, well, one, social interaction in any form is a necessity for all humans. I mean, the loner term is so, I think it's just bad language,
Yep.
because a lot of people, they call like, oh, it's a lone wolf, or no one knew, or they're off. It's like, no, if they were a lone wolf, they'd be living up in the mountains somewhere, and you'd never see them or hear from them, because they're good. They don't want that interaction. They
Exactly.
want to be left alone. These people, actually, the ones who carry out attacks, like, they do want that interaction, and they're not getting it in some manner, or they're not
Right.
being heard in some way,
But they're
and
gonna be.
they don't have it. So it's like,
Yep.
they're not a loner. They've self-identified, they've self-diagnosed as this category, but and that's what's causing sort of this issue, or why they lash out. It's
Yep.
like, the Kaczynski with sending the letters out, and then his brother reading, and going, well, I've heard this before. That's my
Yep.
brother Ted. And it's Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold at Columbine. While the shooting was going on, their parents called in to the sheriff's station, and not to to say, I think it's my kid. Ethan Crumbly, when the parents found out that there was a
Yep.
shooting at the school, they called and said, I think it's my son. What happened with Crooks, right? His parents found out there's a shooting, and they called the police and said, I think it's my kid. So and these are the things that we focus on. And I know we'll get
Yes.
into that in detail in a separate
Yes.
episode.
Yep.
And I think there's a good way to set that up. We just want to wait and verify a few things, and wait till some
Of
more
course.
stuff comes out, so we can present that, what we're suspecting based on the evidence we've seen so far.
Yep.
But it's the way we discuss these things, and the language we use is becomes misleading, and then we sort of attribute things to that, and now we sort of dog pile on, and, oh yeah, and then I bet, he couldn't get a girlfriend, and he couldn't do that. It's like, yeah, well, these were all contributing factors. Maybe he had a chemical imbalance too, his whole
Yep.
entire life, that started when he was a little kid and led him down this path. Like, then they also had this, but we focus on who the target was, and what his motive, or what political party did they belong to.
Distance.
And it's like, look, like, you're
Caliber.
that's inconsequential. That doesn't matter. It matters, like, in terms of investigation, to figure out, was this part of a bigger plan? Like, was this something by some other nation state, or was this a conspiracy carried out by a group of individuals? Yes, that you have to determine as investigation. So you look into what the motive was, but
Yep.
but for stuff like this, it's like none of that matters. This is a broken human being, again, who carried this thing out, and felt like this. So what we do is we sort of conflate all these issues and throw them together, and then go, well, who benefits from this? It's like, well, okay, stop for a
Yep.
second, and go with what you can prove, and what we know, and that's a smaller box, and we're not happy with that. And so I see this with every situation, and it just blows my mind and frustrates me. And this is why I also stay off of social media a lot, because, like, you even brought it up, but just everyone keeps reposting the same shit like that. I mean, yes, I
Yep.
know I do pattern recognition for a living, and so I probably see more patterns than most people do, because
Yep.
that's what I do for a living. But it's like, I scroll through, and it's like, this is all the same thing. The last 67 posts I went by were basically almost identical,
Yeah,
but
but how can you think
everyone's
that
doing
that's
the same thing.
new? That's what we're talking about in this episode. You think that that's a form of validation. You made a mixtape with songs that somebody else wrote and recorded, and you gave them to somebody and said, "This is my life." What? You sent a
Yeah,
passage from a book that another author wrote. Brian, I'm just saying, let's go historically here and put things in
yeah,
in,
yeah, yeah.
in
No, I like
a
these
clear lens,
examples, because they
because what
puts it in
happens.
perspective.
So look, prolonged periods of isolation can lead to mental health issues. That's true. Being a loner has nothing to do with that. That's a completely different thing, but we conflate them. Then all of a sudden, I've got friends and you've got friends that said, hey, look, the fix is in. Well, tell me about that. Well, there's just too many things that happen on this one incident for me to think that they were all random. And I say, second law of thermodynamics. And they go, no, no, no. Don't start with your entropic period in this and the theory. And I go, why? You don't want me to interrupt your bullshit with science? Brian, there was a reason every one of these things happened. If my dad used to say it this way. He said, if the dog wouldn't have stopped to take a piss, he would have caught the rabbit. And it
Yeah,
took me 13
yeah,
years to figure out that my dad was a human behavior profiler. that he understood situation
Yeah.
awareness better than I ever would in my life, because he looked at the situation and instead of putting things together in an awkward Frankensteinian fashion and welding them together, Dad looked at him at 360 and he said, let's take a look what's really happening here. And he rolled it around. And Brian, that's all I think that we're saying here, is that some people get the immediate gratification from being seen as some sort of expert in their field, and that can become the cause of them wanting to repeat that behavior, even though that behavior is no longer necessary for the survival of the tribe.
And we don't, as humans, really understand randomness very well, and we don't,
Exactly.
even though the world is more connected in a sense now. Remember they used to do like the, what was it, the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon or something like that, where they take
Exactly.
any actor and go, well, this actor was in a movie with this person who was with this person who was in, and it all leads back to like Kevin Bacon. Like, and
Right.
it's funny because it's like, yes, that's how the world is. Just because like I have phone numbers and contacts in my phone, and this is nothing about me. This is just that of people that I have met before and discussed, and they would go, "Oh yeah, I remember you, Brian." Who are one phone call away. That person could pick up a phone and call Donald Trump. The other person
Yep.
could pick up a phone and call Barack
Yep.
Obama. Like, that doesn't mean I have any connection to those two people
Yep.
whatsoever. So even though there's one person that could link me to that person, that doesn't mean I can call up and get them on the phone. It
Yep.
just means that's who I've come across in life, and events have coalesced where those people are around other people, and then
Exactly.
that changes this, and then now you're suddenly one thing away. Like, my buddies and I were talking about it when I was back visiting my family in Chicago for the fourth. Like, I went to the first high school I went to was with comedian John Mulaney, and like he's a year ahead of me. And like, one of the stories that went viral, that like from one of his stand-ups, like that was about me and my friends, and that was like, my one buddy is still pissed about it, and it's like, that guy,
Right.
he got off on our story, blah blah blah. And I was like, well, no, he made a joke out of it, but like, that doesn't mean that, it doesn't mean anything besides that. It's like, you happen to have
Yep.
this interaction that 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 person was connected somewhere else in some other fashion. There's no connective fiber. It's a
Right.
random occurrence that coalesces when the events occur. Like, if Crooks had got a flat tire on the way to that thing, we
Yep.
would not be discussing this right now.
Yep.
And you know what? Maybe he would have gone, well, I missed my chance, and never did that. Never did it again. Never
Yep.
did it to anyone else. Never tried that again. Like, and we're not, the part that fascinates me is, you know, why we're not okay with that. Like, why can I not accept that? Why is that not enough for me to go, wow, that's crazy how these things coalesce? One shift in the wind or turn of
Yeah.
the head change the outcome of events. Even though I just saw it where if Trump had to turn his head, he'd be dead right now, assassinated on television. Like,
You
I,
went
I
to
can
a
accept that,
carnival.
and I can say, oh, that's divine intervention or something, whatever you want to attribute that to. But then when it's looking at how this event unfolded, I don't use that same logic. I don't use that same way of looking at things.
You went to a carnival with your kids and allowed carny folk to put them on a ride that may or may have not been tested because they wanted to and said, "Daddy, Daddy, let me go on the ride." And you
It
stood
it
by
was it
when
was
you
just it
watched
was just
that.
cruising down the highway 10 minutes before that.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, and it's leaking oil now. And you stood by when it rackety boomed the kids around, and you were a little afraid of the things that might have happened there, but you did it consciously, knowing what the risks were because you were willing to weigh those risks. The difference is in the moment we tend to do those things. Whereas when we look at big picture stuffs, we still think these things are somehow within our control, talking about them, but they're out of our control. There's something that we had nothing to do with, but we want to give our opinion because I can go home and sleep. I can go home that night and know that's not going to happen to me. Those people, I would have been able to pick them out. Look, those stupid cops, that guy over there yelled in the bit. You have no idea what the noise levels were. You have no idea where they were standing.
Yeah,
The camera is
yeah,
not the
yeah.
perfect eye, but we're willing to comment on it because we want to be part of the team. We don't want to be that person that's not allowed into Studio 54. We don't want to be that person that's so far back in line that they never get interviewed or have a chance at the gosh damn sweepstakes. We want to be relevant. And that's the fight now. The fight now is, can we still be relevant if nobody knows me? You know, the biggest insults? Flyover states. Wow. The gang of
Yeah,
deplorables. When
I
we use that stuff, what does
yeah,
it
see,
do?
yeah,
You understand how that works? So I need you to
you
read my opinion, Brian. I even though it's opinion based testimony, I
right.
want you to
Well,
associate my words with something positive or
I'll
negative.
I'll 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 tell you to stop being a snowflake and stop letting everything hurt your feelings and
Yep.
don't be so offended. But then when you call where I live a flyover state, I get
You crush
offended
me.
and I get
You
upset.
absolutely crush me.
But that's the part that
Humans.
like
That's
is
human.
well, that's what I love about humans. That's
Yep.
everything. That right there is everything. It's
Yep.
it's like you the problem is the problem, but the problem is also like if you're recording yourself doing a rant in a truck like about everything like you're the issue, you're not understanding
Right.
it like that's the
Right.
problem. And which is fine, like I'm not, this is not a judgment on any of these things because we all engage in this behavior in some manner, like
Because
we
it
all
fills
do,
a
like
need. It fills a need that's been with humans since humans. I can't just live in that cave alone. I can fish, I can hunt. That's great. But then I see Ugluk and Mukhtar across the road. I got to go and engage them. And then I engage them, and guess what? I felt pretty good, and I slept better last night because the saber tooth tiger didn't come in the cave because Ugluk stayed up to watch the television and he chased it out. That need, what it forms is a bond, and that bond is hardwired into humans. And guess what? When it came to Crooks wanted to feel that too. And he wanted to feel that so much that he bought a ladder and he scouted things out and he trained and he used so guess what, Brian? He used unconventional methods to achieve the same thing that you achieve on social media every day. And you know what? Can we
yeah.
fault the kid for that? He was 20. Did he know better? Yeah, kind of, but he was just acting out the role we wrote for him. This is not something that like people are still trying to figure
Oh,
out,
we
is he a
have like
Republican or is he a
societally
Democrat?
helped
Come
write it.
on.
Yeah.
We
Yeah. What does it
I
matter?
agree.
Like
I I
he's
agree.
not, he's confused. That's
He's
with
a
any of
confused
them.
kid.
It's like look at, just read any manifesto that anyone has ever written
Isla
about
Vista.
this stuff.
Exactly.
And any one of these and it's all over the place. They
Yes.
have no fundamental understanding. They have no specific ideology and intent. They rarely do unless it's like,
He held
you
down the
know,
job.
eh,
He had friends. Come on.
yeah,
So did
yeah.
Elliot Rodger, right? I mean, you're onto something now, and that's for future episode, folks. The point here is
That's for
that the
the
inevitability
yeah.
comes from the hardwired psychopathy of humans, and we all repeat those behaviors because they're in our best interest when we
Can't
were growing up, and we haven't evolved past them.
so so what can what can I do, given everything we talked about and given the
Yeah.
context and how communication is, like how can I regulate that? Like, cause me, it's hard. It's like I gotta get to stay off this fucking site for the next week.
Yep.
But that's even me knowing how this stuff works. It's hard for me to sort of accept it or go through it because I just get bombarded with it. Now the memes, the funny stuff. Oh, please, if you're sent those of you out there who have been sending me that, fucking hilarious. I love it because
Yep.
it's great that show the sense of humor. But but when it comes to this, I'm going to make a comment. It's kind of like I'm super hesitant. I mean, you've even seen me in class where people lay stuff out, and I was like,
Yep.
"Look, based on what you're saying, but it sounds like there's more. Let me caveat that with a few things. Here's why I'm arriving at that. Like, so what can I do to get? Is there anything I can do if I'm listening to this right now to like to get better at it or filter it or do something? I mean,
Yeah.
to help gain just help gain a better perspective on what it is that I'm ingesting. What is this
Yep.
information that I'm ingesting?
So I would say start with you first. And I'm telling everybody, start with yourself first. I don't know if that's proper grammar. And what I mean by that is that you've got to take a look
It's
and
Detroit public school grammar.
exactly, what's the necessity of the comment that you're about to make or write or post? What's the urgency? Is there a purpose to it? Now, if that purpose is that you want to rant and vent, then it's okay because if you don't rant and vent in writing or in, making
Yeah.
a video or do something like that, you're going to blow top, and that's not healthy. If it's going to be inciting somebody to get up and work towards cleaning up the river, I would say that you're probably on the right track. If it's inciting somebody to come up and just be civil disobedient,
Yeah.
to be a classic, obstructionist, I would say you're probably on the wrong direction. Your attitude and emotions and ability to blend in with other humans societally is for a purpose. It's for you to live out a long life and procreate, and everybody will get along. DEI, when it's forced, is shit. DEI, when it occurs naturally in socialization, is always a wonderful thing. Take a look around you. So, what you got to do is you got to disconnect once in a while. You got to take the phone and shut it off. You got to put it away. You got to read a different magazine. You got to sit down with a couple of people at the coffee shop and talk about things. And what I mean is opening the aperture. Because what you've allowed, if you allowed the last few years of social media to narrow your focus and your perspective. And when I narrow my focus and my perspective, I can't get out of my own way. I'm so trapped. Look, how many times do we say thinking outside the box? Dude, there's a lot of great shit in the box, and we're handing out flashlights.
Yeah.
But go back to that white belt curiosity. And when you're a white belt, you're learning so much more than you do when you're a black belt. And if that
Right.
makes sense to you,
Right.
that's how I live my life, Brian. Look, I'm an opinionated son of a bitch, and I know a lot of shit. But you know why I don't go on social media? Folks, I have a LinkedIn site, and every Monday I drop it. Happened on a Monday, and I comment on other people's site. Why? Because I'm trying to make money by broadening my appeal and exposure in my brand. So a new client will go, holy shit, this guy might know what he's talking about. The reason we're on this
Right.
podcast is because we're trying to
Yeah.
open your aperture. We're not trying to close it.
Yeah.
So Brian, that would be my answer. And I know it felt convoluted, but I hope you can see my primary goal is that social media can work either way. Don't let it have the
And
pendulous effect. Sometimes you need to disconnect.
And I think you actually hit the nail on the head, which would be my answer to my own question or my advice to people when you said start with you.
Yes.
And so it's like a lot of people are just doing things and repeating this behaviors out of habit, and this is what it's become.
Yep.
And there's almost no intent behind it because it's just something you've done. And if you don't know your own intent behind why you're doing something, then you that's where you
Spot
need
on.
to think about it. It's like, what is the
Precisely.
point of this that I'm trying to make? And that's even ingesting the information too. Like I don't like you said, part of the reason why people say so much stuff is because language actually is only so much and you can only base so much on words, and so because this is based that because this mass communication is based on just lines of text,
Yep.
I infer a lot of things, and I may be wrong about that, and so I don't get someone's intent. But if I look at it and go, what is your intent with this? What are you really trying to say, or what are you trying to get across, or really trying to do? It helps me, well, because I do that when I'm on these apps, because it goes, all right, this person has no idea what their intent is. They're just on transmit. They're just blasting
Right.
shit out there.
Thumb up,
And when
thumb
other
down,
ones,
hate,
especially
whatever.
well, especially if you look at like a political ad or something like that, there's a
Yes.
clear intent and a clear message behind it. Those are great
Yep.
examples to use to go, okay, this is a profile of something that is deliberate and there's an intent behind it, and they're
Yep.
trying to get me to think, act, behave, or whatever in a certain manner. So it's very, very, very deliberate, and so it's great to see that, because it's a great comparison to something like, well, then what's this over here? It's
Yep.
just someone spouting off nonsense, like, or speaking off the cuff, like, because like we, even when we're doing this podcast, like we at least
Yeah.
have an intent behind an episode. We may not spell it out explicitly on purpose. We might just keep it like implicit with what we're talking about and let the listener kind of take it where they want to, because there's certain topics and
Yep.
certain subjects that we do that because we want to make it personal to you. And sometimes it's very clear saying like, hey, this is what we believe, this is why we believe it, here's some evidence to support that claim, this is what you can
Exactly.
do with it. And so that intent and being deliberate, I think is more relevant now than it ever has been, because it helps keep the message clear. I guess that would be
Yeah.
my takeaway from it too, Greg. I don't know if you have
Yeah,
anything
just a few
else
things.
to
Shannon West, shout out to Shannon West and his wife. Keep doing the great stuff you're doing. Thanks for being a fan. Same thing, Cassie. out in Montrose. Love, love. Thanks for being such a fan. Brian Tila won the watershed first and third, two different horses during the
Nice.
rodeo. Lanny
Yeah, you
didn't
sent some
come into the
photos. Yeah,
money
that was
on
cool.
roping, and so Lanny's pissed. He's right down the hill. That's what the dog was barking at, as Lanny's loading up the horses to go roping. So lots happened in Gunnison over the last couple of weeks, folks. And this attempt assassination shouldn't change the rest of your world, man. There's a lot of things that are going to
Yeah.
happen, and we can come back from anything. We're resilient. We're humans. Go out and be curious today. Find something new.
Yeah, I'm actually very fascinated and interested in this sort of moment in time and how things have shifted rapidly over the last couple of years coming out of
Yeah,
COVID, and just different things that are falling by the wayside finally that should, and things that are now being discussed, and ways that are being discussed or changing. So I actually look at all of these things as, it's well, it's danger and opportunity, right? It's
that's it.
it's
I've
it's
heard that
so
somewhere. There was a good class I
yeah.
went to.
Um, yeah. So one other thing to listeners too, there is no whatever podcast player you're listening to this on or watching. There actually should be. There's a little thing on there that says send us a text message. You can kind of respond or say something about the episode. We can't respond directly back to you. That's for our Patreon subscribers. So you can always find out more. There's a link in there too to support the show, or it says Patreon, and we do a lot more on there and answer any questions people have when you reach out to us. So there's always that on there, but there is a little thing for feedback. I love getting feedback from this stuff, and we don't get, we get feedback or we get comments from the people that have been following us, but like, just the random ones I always like to. I always want to know how that stuff comes across. So we would
Sure.
appreciate it if you reach out there. Shout out to Richard Simmons.
Yeah,
Brought a lot of joy to
he really
people's
did.
lives, and
Brian,
and
I used
and,
to I
and got
used a
things
diet.
moving.
Richard Simmons came up with a certain diet that he did with Weight Watchers and some other people. I used that when I was a copper, man. The vest was getting a little tight, and I
And
sweated to the oldies
you
because
sweat it to the
they weren't
oldies.
oldies to me. You know what I'm
and
saying?
then
So
and then
I like that.
and also
Jazzercise, man.
also famous sex therapist Dr. Ruth died. I think she's like 95 or 96. Woman
I
probably.
hope she died getting railed. I honest to God hope she was still in the sack.
Jesus.
No, because she was cool too. She was a pioneer, you know. So
She
I'm
was a
glad to hear that.
pioneer
She was
talking about
also a
things that
survivor.
people weren't
Yeah.
weren't yeah weren't talking about,
Hey, there's a lot of ways of
she
dying in
knows.
bed. That's a good one. Just remember that. There's a lot of really
Yeah,
shitty ways
that's
of
not
dying in bed, Bob Saget. I'm just saying. Think about it.
that's going. Jesus.
At least you're not angry anymore.
That's that's going on your business card. There's a lot of shitty
Yeah,
ways to die in bed. So
exactly. That's
that's going on
great.
your tombstone. That's your
Thank
epitaph
you.
right there.
Thank you.
So I think on that note, Bob
Yeah.
Saget, that
Edit. Edit
there's thing if thanks everyone for tuning in. We appreciate it. There's always room for
for Jello.
Jello. There's always more. So follow the links and find out more. But we appreciate you tuning in, and don't forget that training changes behavior.